Okay, it's 2 o'clock. I
Let's
guess
get
we'll
this
get
started.
started.
Mhm.
Yes. All right. So, first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I know you've got a lot of interesting sessions you could pick, and I'm really happy to see you pick mine. Um, and really excited to be here. I'm going to go through a lot of different things today. We're going to try and leave some room at the end for Q&A as well. But we'll get started with a little brief introduction. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So you should be seeing a lovely cartoon version of me over there on the left-hand side. And who the heck am I? Why am I here? Well, the list is over on the right. I'm a former educator. I taught for 21 years in higher ed here in Toronto. I actually live in Scarborough. I taught at Centennial College for 21 years. I also taught at Humber College, taught photography, digital imaging, photojournalism, web design, all those different areas were part of what I did at school. But I was also a professional photographer and still am to a degree, as well as a writer. And I also contribute to a service that you all at Seneca College have access to called Adobe Stock, which is pretty cool with the kind of imagery that's there. And we'll touch a little bit on that today, but not go into it in any great depth. Currently, my job description, I'm a senior solutions consultant for Adobe Stock and for education. I basically support our customers and our sales teams to make sure that everyone gets the benefits and that maximizes their investment on what they're doing from Adobe's perspective. But today, I want to talk to you specifically about a very um, important part of what my life is about. And I think we're seeing this more and more throughout education because of the uh, changes in the past couple of years. Let's face it, the past 16, 18 months have not been a cakewalk for all of us by any means. And things have certainly been altered in how we deal with things, how we do everything, how we tell stories, how we learn, how we teach. Um, and digital storytelling is something that I'm a huge proponent of, and I've been doing it for a long time myself. And we'll see a couple of personal examples, and I want to show you some examples of what other schools are doing, what other students are doing as well. But the whole idea here is to move from just from a student perspective, to move from just being a consumer of content of just give me the links, send me the URLs, and I'll read it and get back to you, to becoming that individual, and whether you're a student or a teacher for that matter, becoming that individual who actually creates that content, who curates it, who pulls it together, who shares it, who becomes their own publisher, tells their own stories. And we've always had our own stories to tell. Everyone has a story to tell. I think it's just gotten a lot easier to do so in a variety of different ways from the technology perspective. But the other really fascinating part of this is that it's so much easier now to share that story, to get it out there, to create an audience, to share what impacts you, and maybe find like-minded individuals, if you will. But that whole concept of not just creating that content, but sharing it, generating awareness for a cause, for research, for a situation. These are all things that have become so much easier to do in the past few years, and in fact, in the past year and a half, and so are pretty much been the way that we've been sharing information in many cases. So we're going to look at a few different examples here. I use a couple different mediums for my storytelling. I use a tool service from Adobe called Behance, which is a free service for anybody. And I publish a lot of projects on there, a lot of photography projects, obviously, with my background as a photographer, but also I tell a lot of stories. I like to include writing with the pictures to sort of share that kind of concept. But I'm also doing different things too. I do like to write on its own, on my own. Separate from that, I do a variety of different things. And one of the things I did a while ago, this is going back, geez, I think I actually originally typed this story. So that's how far back we're going. I used a typewriter with real paper to type this story, and it was called A Midnight Clear. Now, this is a Christmas story. I'm not going to go into too much of the details here. I'll scroll through it a little bit. But the reason I bring this up is that when I wrote this, It was, yeah, I enjoyed it. I got a lot of good feedback from it. Eventually, I was able to share it as a PDF on the web, that kind of thing. But there was always something missing to me as a writer. There was something missing. And what that was a way to illustrate that story. Now, I'm a photographer. I am not an illustrator. I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. And even as a photographer, there's just locations and time and things like that that I just don't have the chance to get to. So one of the things that I did with this particular project was I started looking into stock imagery to help support the storyline. And I'll just scroll through a little bit of this for a second, just to give you a sense, pulling from the story and finding imagery that really resonates with aspects of the story. Now, in my case, this is a fictional story I wrote, but this could just as easily have been a piece of research. And I'm trying to find imagery to back that up. Maybe I can capture some of that myself, documentary style. Maybe sometimes I'm looking for just the right kind of image to really get that point across. And sometimes stock imagery comes in really handy for that, whether it's Adobe stock or whether it's some other stock source, free source, whatever it happens to be. And you can see as I move through here, it's imagery, it's photography, it's a range of different things. And I think what's key here is that I'm able to sort of make the story richer by using those visual elements, whether I capture them myself or create them myself, whether I'm able to access and use those imagery from other creators to help make that story that much more impactful. I enjoyed doing this so much that I actually, get rid of that little guy there, I actually wrote a story again on how I did what I did, because there were a lot of technical elements too. I was not just pulling images in, I was actually changing them to make them work better with the storyline. And this was something I wrote and posted out through Behance, and just sort of talking about the differences between what the imagery started with and how it ended up, so that I could actually make it work from my story perspective. So being able to, whoops, didn't want to do that. Being able to share your stories and tell those stories, super, super critical. And a lot of times that starts, again, regardless of who you are, what end of the learning spectrum you may be on. It starts with having a goal or a passion that you want to talk about, that you want to share about. And I find that's often the easiest way to get started, is to pick something that's of interest, because you're going to be motivated to tell that story further, to dig deep if you want to, and hopefully in the same process, through text, through still images, through video, you're going to actually share more of your personal investment, your emotion about that particular situation or project, whether it's you're reflecting on things that have happened in your life, things around you in the world, or your own projects or research that you're doing. All of these things can benefit from good storytelling. And then when you have that, all those elements together combined into a final piece, getting it out there and sharing it out to a wider audience is always a great idea, because you want to generate that awareness. You want to make people aware of what's going on and why it's important. Nothing more, I think, from a standpoint of an educator, I love nothing more than reading the work of students, or seeing the work of students where they are invested in what they've done for me, or what they've done for the course, or as an assignment, and they're not just doing it because they have to do it because it's part of the program. There's something that's of interest to them, and that you can see that difference in that kind of work, right? And I think you'd agree with that. So a couple things to think about. Actually, I'll switch back over here for a second. And I want to point out a couple of things. One of them is we have become a real visual medium, a real visual world, more so than ever, especially again because of what's happened with the pandemic. But sharing words and imagery is becoming more and more almost expected, if you will. And then thinking about how you can work with these, what you have available to you now, the technology, and how you can sort of infuse that into your current courses, and where that might be valuable is also really a really important thing to consider. Now, this is more about stock, but I want to point out a couple of things here again. Looking for imagery is important. Finding that resource If it can be yourself as a faculty member or a student doing a work and it's their own work, awesome. If there's things they need that they can't find, then those kinds of resources are out there. And like I said, Seneca has this content available to them, or this service available to them as part of their agreement with Adobe, which is kind of exciting. Why is all this important now? Why are we looking at this and saying, why is digital storytelling sort of taking off and maybe getting more focused than it might have in the past? A lot of it comes around to the last 18 months. I keep falling back on that, but it's true. But it's also going beyond that, where there's going to be things that continue to happen after everything goes back to, I'll quote, air quotes, normal. There's going to be expectations, either conscious or unconscious or subconscious, from employers on what students, what graduates need to provide, what's beneficial. And sometimes that'll be a case where they don't necessarily know exactly what they're looking for, but they'll know when they don't see it, right? And we've heard that phrase before. I'll know what I like when I see it. Same kind of concept here. This idea of digital agility for students, I think, is really, really critical. Being able to not just, surf the web, but actively use it and make it work for you. From a research perspective, from a sourcing perspective, things along those lines. From the standpoint of remote teaching and learning, having the ability to communicate effectively, dynamically, engagingly. These are all things that are all part of that story process. And I think that's important to remember. Okay, let me just pop over here. I want to show you a couple examples of not of my work, but of things that I've seen from other customers from other schools that have been hugely impactful. First one here is from Virginia Commonwealth University down in the US. The faculty there and the students put together an entire portfolio called Our Stories around the whole concept of experience of students who are Black and what they're going through, what they've gone through, what they continue to go through. And while I won't go through all of these different stories, they are really emotional, and I'll certainly provide resources or links to this content later on. I'm just going to click in here for a second into this project, and we can see that this is a live, living document. This is content that's constantly being added to, So we're seeing stories here, a range of different things. I'm just going to go ahead and switch to this one here by Murray Littlepage. I read this one the first time, and I was at a loss for words in many ways. It was shocking what this young man had gone through. So I'm just going to click on to his story here. And we're just going to take a quick look at some of this. And these are all images he's accessed. He's created himself, resourced from others that are about either himself or the photos of himself, or the tie-in with this story that he's telling. And just this opening quote, and I'm not going to read it out loud, but you can read it for yourself. Now, that is heart-wrenching and engaging, and frankly makes me want to keep reading to see what would have caused this kind of emotion, this level of emotion, and this fear and pain this young man had as a child. So just phenomenally impactful stories written from the heart. And that's why I sort of come back to that concept of we all have a story to tell. We probably all have more than one story to tell. And the stories that mean something to us, the things that mean things to us, are the ones that are really going to impact others as well, if we can share that story and share that emotions. So a phenomenally wonderful story, heartbreaking in its own ways, definitely, but really puts you in the shoes of an individual as to what they've been going through. So I was thoroughly blown away by this particular example. And there's many others like this. I won't be going through all of them individually, but these are all first-person reflections of students. It's a great project. I love the fact that it's continuing to be added to as we go. So that's one example. technology used here is a combination of things. This process that where these stories have been sort of curated is Adobe Portfolio. Sometimes they're written in Adobe Portfolio. Sometimes they're using a tool like Adobe Spark, and some of you may know that name. Spark is a tool I use all the time for storytelling. It's really easy to use, and I don't have to worry about the tool. I just worry about my story, and I think that's really, really critical. If we have time, I'll give you a brief sort of introduction to that tool if you like. Another one here that, again, is hugely impactful. This is a series of stories told with Adobe Spark. These are students from the Ute Nation. And some of these are videos. You can go to YouTube and see them. Some of them are, actually quite a few of them are videos. And again, this was curated by the faculty member. As he pulled together these stories, they were talking about digital storytelling on this First Nations community, and getting the students to engage and talk about themselves and talk about their stories. And again, a great, wonderful quote here. And this sort of ties in the way stories were told and were experienced with the way things are happening now. You know, when I was very young, he would tell me stories from the past. Tell me about how his father would make him and his brother walk up the mountainside. That oral tradition, right? Now being shared in a digital format, and in many cases through video, to give that sense of that oral tradition, rather than it being first person or person to person, that kind of thing. So again, really, really phenomenal, touching stories. And these are all from, I think, kids that are, I think, 16 and under. And by and large, so they did some really, really great work here. Yeah, and just really quite impressive as to what they've pulled together and what they've brought out in themselves. A lot of times when you start this process as an individual, you wonder, well, what do I have to say? What's important? What are other people going to care? Why are they going to care? Why would they bother to read or to listen? And you know, that's a typical kind of response in many cases. But sharing what's heartfelt, sharing what's important to you, I think will resonate with different people. And I think that's a really critical component of this, why this whole concept around digital storytelling is so powerful. It's not just about telling the story. It's the fact that that story can go out there, right? And can be experienced by a multitude of people, depending on how you share it and what you want to do with it from that perspective. Now, in terms of what the elements of a digital story are, there's some really good information about that, and I'm just going to pop back over here. This is another project I put together. This is partly a curation of my own digital storytelling, but what I did up front was I wanted to talk about what digital storytelling was, rather than just, hey, here's some stuff I did. So there's some, I think, some really good information in here about digital storytelling. One of the things that fascinated me was to realize that the concept of digital storytelling isn't as new or novel as we might have thought. In fact, Ken Burns was probably almost the grandfather or father of digital storytelling, going back to 1990. So we're talking decades ago. And he created an entire film or series on the Civil War, using what, if you've sort of listened into photography or cinematography terms, the Ken Burns effect, where, you know, in many cases, especially with the kind of research and documentary he was doing, there wasn't a lot of live action video going on back in the Civil War. So he had historical documents, historical photographs, and put to video, if they just sit there on the screen, it's kind of dull. So tie that in with music and narration, and then subtle movement, panning and zooming across these still images to create some form of animation, if you were a movement, became sort of that first digital storytelling experience. And as I said, it's also often referred to as the Ken Burns effect. There's even video tools. Oh, I know of a couple that we make that actually refer to these kinds of things with inside the software. So the technology is getting easier to use as we go. I mean, we've seen a growth of and sophistication of the tools, but also an effort, I think, especially by Adobe, but other companies as well, to make the tools easy to use from the beginning. When I was teaching at Centennial College, I was teaching advertising students first year digital imaging. This is going back, 1990, the 2000s. It was challenged sometimes because the tools were professional tools, but they were a little tough to get a grasp on if you were new to this kind of thing. They weren't the app experience so much as they're used to, whether that's Instagram or TikTok or whatever, where you just push a button to create an effect and you're done. The tools have gotten better from that perspective. It's easier to do some pretty complicated things by almost pushing one button that you couldn't do before. Things like selecting a subject or selecting a sky or making changes that way has become much more readily available, and it makes it easier to focus on the final result rather than how to get to the final result. You can start sort of visualizing things and spending more time on the fine details rather than the larger elements. So as the technology became easier to use, it became more affordable as well. We're able to tell these stories in a variety of different ways, and also get them out there in a variety of different ways. One particular location or resource I looked at was the Center for Digital Storytelling. And I've got links in this document. I'll provide it later on if you like. That talks about the whole concept of digital storytelling, what it actually entails and things like that. And then I get into my own projects as examples, and I also lower down, share some examples of other people's work. Those two projects that we saw a minute ago are in there, but also other resources on the concept of digital storytelling. But you've also got a resource if you're at Seneca, if you're faculty at Seneca, you've got a great resource, and that is the Digital Storytelling Sandbox. I don't know if you all know of this or not, but I just wanted to put this up here when I was doing my planning for the session today. I was reminded about this, and just a great sort of distillation of the process, right? They've broken it down into specific steps. You can see them in the visual here. And this is a resource Seneca College faculty have access to. And if you're not from Seneca College, like I said, there's lots of other great resources out there that can help you, including, probably not surprisingly, National Geographic. This is a phenomenal resource under their professional development section, storytelling for impact. And there's obviously films here, and you can approach this from the persona of an educator or as probably a student, right? And sort of go down those different paths if you want. And there's some great information here on how to create and how to use stories to energize the classroom. So this is another great resource as well. And another one that I found that I thought was really nice because it summed things up fairly effectively is the University of Houston. And this is just a segment out of one of their resources, but educational uses for digital storytelling. If you are stuck, if you're wondering how this might be beneficial, this is a great little sort of synopsis. Defines digital storytelling as well. And what you'll notice is that as you approach different sources, they all have their own sort of spin on things a little bit, but there are certain things that come into play. They all kind of agree that this is a mixed media process. It's not just written word. It's not just still photographs. It's a mixture of text, of audio, of video, animation, illustration, if that's available or needed. So there's a combination of things, and that tired old term we've heard for so long, multimedia, is essentially what this is. It's a combination of all these different technologies pulled together and helping to make that really effective story that, as somebody who's sitting here in their office, disconnected from that individual, I can get that experience and get that feeling that individual was trying to get across. Okay, so let's see. I went to Greg, so let me just bear with me for a quick second here. Well, you're going to see a common theme here. As I mentioned, I use a lot of our own tools at Adobe to build this content out. This is an example of a finished Adobe Stock, Adobe Spark presentation. And I wanted to pull this up for a couple reasons. One of them is there's some research here I wanted to share. And while it's, again, it sort of ties back into the use of imagery not created by the student or by you as a faculty member, it's worth noting that we have found basically that stock content is utilized in education far more than a lot of people seem to realize. And not misused, but used. There's a range of different service providers for this kind of thing. A report that Edelman Intelligence did for Adobe recently showed that there was faculty and staff were already using a wide variety of stock. And hopefully what we're seeing through as these services evolve, we're going to be seeing more and more sophisticated use of imagery, right? Stock imagery is not what we used to think of stock imagery as, where there's the handshake over the business table, what used to be considered a stock image. And frankly, there was that dark time in stock where that was the kind of imagery you found. But now what we need, as creators, what we expect as the audience, as the consumer of that content, is much more relevant, much more authentic, much more genuine imagery. Sometimes we're capable as individuals of capturing those images or creating those images ourselves, which is awesome. But there are times when you're not. You may be a brilliant researcher. You may be able to spin words out and create phenomenal prose, but you pick up a camera, whether it's your smartphone or a digital camera, and you just never seem to get what you want out of it. And that's where tools like stock come in really, really handy, because it can help you find the imagery that really is at the level, the caliber of the writing and the research that you've been producing. So I just wanted to point that out. Students are a huge consumer of stock, and here it becomes a little more iffy as to how it's being used or how it's being sourced. But a lot of them use search engines to do it. And I remember my days as a teacher. I sound like an old guy now. Get off my lawn. But my days as a teacher, the number of times I would see a photo courtesy of Google, which was never really the case. Hopefully that level of sophistication has changed, but they do use search engines to find imagery. The problem with finding the imagery in that manner often is that they're not really clear on whether they can actually use the imagery, or they may not even consider whether they need permission to use it. It depends on the individual, depends on what they've learned so far about working with content that's not their own. But one of the advantages is, one of the things to be aware of is that it's out there. They're looking for content. They're using photography a lot. I think I don't have a statistic for this, but I have a feeling they're more likely to create their own videos in their own way, because that seems to be much more the common course for content creators these days is that video creation. I'm kind of the other way around. My background is still photography, so I have to really think to shoot video. I don't necessarily do it without stopping and saying, okay, you've taken this photo, now what are you going to do? Are you going to talk about the photo? Are you going to do a little bit of selfie video and talk about why you took this photo? Are you going to do anything like that? And there are times where I admit I've forgotten or just hadn't even considered doing that side of it, because I typically go from photography to writing and back. And it's an area where I have to build my strength on, right? From the standpoint of creating that kind of content, because that is what we're seeing as more and more what people expect, what people want. The rise of YouTube and Vimeo and TikTok and all these things, all this content, it's all video. And that is something that we want to think about from that storytelling perspective. How can I make use of that? How do I plan that out intelligently, as opposed to just casually coming up with the idea, oh, I should really take a video of this while I'm here. But how do I plan that out? Right? So things to consider when you're doing that storytelling, is where do these different parts fit? And planning that process, I think, is really critical. It doesn't have to be a mind-numbing long storyboard, step by step, but even a rough outline of what you're planning to do when you're assembling all this will hopefully resolve or save you from the, oh geez, I wish I had and thinking, oh, I should have shot a video, but I'm not there anymore, right? I'm not at that location anymore. So if you can think about those things, if you're planning that kind of thing out, it can be great. And it's worth mentioning to students as well. These are the things to think about. You can certainly pull things together after the fact, and do that reflection component anywhere. But sometimes it's kind of handy to have that, or kind of nice to have that on the, where the thought inspired you, where it came up, and why it was important from that perspective. Okay. All right. So, where do we go from here? Where do we get this process? How do we spin this process up? Like I said, there's lots of different ways to do this. I think having that plan is really important. Like I said, even if it's a rough outline, it's a good beginning. And then it's a question of pulling in those assets. Are we going to create them ourselves? We're probably going to do all the writing ourselves, unless we're using quotes or some research. But then we also have to think about, still images, video footage. How's that being pulled together? Is that being shot on our own, by us, by me, by you? Or is it something we have to actually source because we just have no hope of getting to a location like that? Excuse me for 1 second. That's better. So having that plan is really important. And then it's a question of pulling the content together. There are lots of tools out there. Obviously, I probably have a little bit of bias towards one set, but there are lots out there, right? Whatever works for you is the most important thing. How can I effectively tell my story? Like I said, one of the tools I use a lot is Adobe Spark. And I'm going to bring that up on screen here for a second. And I'm just going to go right back to the beginning here. Spark is a free tool. Okay, I just want to be really clear about that. This is a tool that anybody can use. I use it a lot, and this is just a small sampling of things that I've got here. But I've got so much content, I've had to break it out into subcategories. Spark allows you to do a few different things. First of all, you can do long form written projects, web pages, basically. You can create short videos, and you can create graphics. All these things are part of this interface, and all three of those capabilities are available through the website, spark.adobe.com. There's also mobile apps on iOS for Spark Page, Spark Post, and Spark Video. And I believe on Android, their Spark Post, the graphics tool, is available. But the website is really where a lot of the focus is going and the innovation is happening. And building something out is really straightforward. Once you're logged in with your credentials, again, they could be your free Adobe credentials, they could be social media credentials. If you're a faculty or student at Seneca College, you'd log in with your school credentials and you'd have instant access as well. Once you're in that front page, like we see here, the process is really simple. Click on the blue plus sign. And this gives you a starting point, a jumping off point for whatever it is you want to do. And what I like about the way this is set up is it's talking about projects, talking about end results. What do I want to create, right? Not what tool do I want to use? What are the top 10 things in Photoshop that are most important? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve? So right off the bat here, I've got some examples of things I could do. I could create an Instagram story graphic. I could create a collage, another type of graphic. I could create a web page or a video. So if I choose web page as an example, up comes this screen. And again, that process of creation is pretty straightforward. It's pretty obvious what I'm doing here. I need to add a title. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and put something in here. I can add a subtitle if I want to. The other thing I want to do is I want to grab interest. I want to generate an emotion, a feeling, a reason to want to keep going as far as from an audience perspective. I want them to keep going, keep looking, keep reading. So what I can do is I can automatically just pick an image to put in there as a starting point. So I click on that little plus sign down here and choose photo. Now I can upload my own personal photos, perfectly fine. I can find free photos, typically from services like Unsplash. Again, Adobe Stock is here. As a Seneca College faculty or student, you've got access to stock. If I've got my own images on Creative Cloud or something I found on, I've stored on Dropbox, I can even go to Google Photos to look around if I want to, and I can go ahead and pick something. So in my case here, I'm going to start with find a free photo. And autumn in Ontario. Let's see what I get. Do a search. So no, okay. So let's just try something a little less specific. And here we're pulling these up. These are coming from Pixabay, and these are all free to use images. I can find anything I like here to start off with if I want to, if I don't have the images myself. If I do have them, just go back. I can choose to upload, or in my case, I'm a big user of Adobe Lightroom where all my photos are stored. So I can go in there and actually browse for content. And in my case, I just actually was up at the cottage this weekend and got some great shots. I think this one here, just grab that, drop it into place. If I don't have access to that kind of thing, again, I've got those services, free photos or stock, whatever works for me. And then once that image is in place, you'll notice that my prompt down at the bottom has changed. Scroll to start telling your story. There's that magical plus sign again, and here's all the things I can do, right? I can add more photos. I can start typing. I can add a hyperlink to something else. If I've got a video that I've recorded and maybe put up on Vimeo or YouTube, I can create an embed link and drop that video in. I can create a photo grid, so a whole gallery of images. And there's a couple neat little tools inside of Spark that give me some little more interactivity from a user perspective. It makes the design and the layout a little easier to sort of a little more appealing. And the beauty of all of these options is they're not hard to grasp, but not hard to use. Photos, pretty straightforward, very much like we just saw a minute ago. In my case, it's defaulting to where I was the last time. And I'll just go back in here and just grab something else, just for the heck of it. Oh, let's go with that for now. And I can select multiple images if I want to. I'll just select the one. It's going to drop that image into place. And I wanted to bring this in because once you bring in an image on its own beyond the title, you can change how it's displayed. You can see the whole image here, like we have now. I can choose to make it fill the screen and add information in a caption. I can choose to use it as a window, which means I only see part of the image. It's sort of revealed as I scroll. And I use this sometimes as a way to sort of break up content, as a nice divider. I can also make some adjustments, change its location, that kind of thing. So I've got some ways to play around with that. But likewise, if I go back into my options here, if I want to, there's my text options. I can select, create headings, pull quotes, bulleted lists, and so on. Some basic text formatting. Nothing that's crazy, nothing that's really hard to understand. And the beauty of the way this tool works is that I don't have to really know the underpinnings of the software. It's meant to be easy to use. So I can focus on creating, on telling my story, and not on how do I make this stuff work, right? So I'm going to add a little bit of text here. Just add a heading. There we go. And I can continue on adding in more content as I want, whether it's text or images. What I can do as well, I mentioned earlier, a couple of these interesting devices for sharing information are Glide Show and Split Layout. I like these because they give you a very professional look without you having to do any serious heavy lifting on your own. A Glide Show basically is a collection of images. You can collect them. I'm going to cancel out of the Lightroom one for now. And I'm just going to go into find free photos. I've still got my autumn search key here, and I can start to grab images like that. And then as I add these images, once I get as many as or as few as I want, I'll just click save. And I'm brought back to my story. And what we see now here are these beautiful full screen images. And I've got the ability to add in my story inside the image, right? So I can add additional photos. I can add text. I can add a hyperlink through a button. I can even embed another video without, having to spend a lot of time figuring out the how. It's given me a really nice, lovely presentation methodology here. And if I click on the image in the background, I can always go back to edit those photos. If I don't like them, if I want to change them, I can do that. I can do something called change the focal point, which means I can actually, if you take a look in the upper right corner there, you'll see a little window that shows me what this might look like on a mobile phone. So I can actually change the location of the positioning of that photo so it looks the way I want it to look on a smaller device and held in a portrait orientation. So whatever works for me from that perspective. So I can continue on with that process. I'm not going to go and write a whole story for you here. That could be painful to watch. But I wanted to show you that how the process can happen and how quickly you can start pulling content together. I can preview this content anytime I want. Oh, just waiting for it to finish saving. I think I might just add a heading. See if that sort of prompts it. All right. One of the things that Spark does is it automatically saves in the background. I think I might be having a little connectivity issue here. So I'm just going to go ahead and reload this. This is not something I'm super worried about. So there we go. Good. And yeah, everything's there. So when I get to the point where I want to see how this might look in a browser, I can go ahead and preview it. I can see how my audience is going to see this work and how they're going to experience it. I'm going to scroll up and down and sort of walk through. And as I said, this is essentially a long form web page, right? It's not a website, it's a single page. But you can see how when you use that technique called the glide show, you get that lovely transition from image to image. And as I add text into those areas, when I'm in the editing mode, you'll get that content area, which I can reposition if I want to the left, to the right, or to the center. So I can play with the layout a bit, make it a little more visually appealing so everything's not just in one straight line all the way down. And I do that quite a bit myself to sort of play on things because I tend to incorporate a lot of words with my stories, my photo stories. So it can be really beneficial from that perspective. I can then, if I'm happy with the end result, that sharing component is the other part that's really important. We can tell all the stories we want, but I think it's important to get those stories out there, not just as a student to get it submitted for grading or for assessment, but if it's something that really matters to me, if it's something that means something to me, which I hope it is when they tell these stories, I would like to think they will want to share that. And it's really easy to do by clicking on the share options here. I just choose publish and share a link. I can also print it out as well if I want to, and that'll basically convert my story to a PDF. I will warn you that the PDF is not fancy, but it is a printed record of it. So I can choose share, so publish and share the link. There's my title already in place from what I put in there. I can pick a category to help with people trying to find this content. So maybe I'm going to choose, let's go with photography. I can either enable or disable my own credit there. You'll notice here, this is kind of interesting because I've pulled in imagery that's not mine. Pulled it in through the Spark service. It's automatically building out the photo credits for me, which is a huge time saver as an individual trying to cite that stuff later on or forgetting to cite it. So I can I can add to this if I want. I can incorporate my own photo credits if I'm supplying some of the imagery myself. But that's the great thing. It will pull that information in from those services, whether it's the Find Free Photos function or whether it's Adobe Stock. And then I can also go ahead and add in additional content as well. I can normally edit my image there a bit, but it's for some reason it's gone blank. We'll just click Create Link. It's simple as doing that, and within seconds, this story is now live, right? And I can share that URL. Now, a question I get a lot of times is, well, I have students do this kind of thing, but they do it with PowerPoint. What's the benefit of doing something like this? Much like any kind of web page, the main key benefit is a persistent URL for current content. Okay, so if I'm doing something that's research driven, and I find new research I want to add to that particular story, if I've done this in a PowerPoint deck, I've got to get the research, put it into the deck, save it, and then make sure that I send it out to all the people that I sent the original one to, because otherwise they have out of date content. Because this is a web page, and because this URL is persistent, it means every time I make changes and republish, everyone has access to the most current version of my story, which is great, right? There's my publish options there. So I can go back to those if I need to. But basically, I can go back to the link. I can share it, copy and paste, share it through Facebook, social media channels, through Google Classroom, even Microsoft Teams. Right? I can even embed it. So I've actually done this quite a bit, where I've embedded these stories into other projects through tools like Behance or websites, things along those lines, even blogs like something from WordPress. So it can be a great way to sort of combine different technologies as well. So if I copy this, just close this window, open up a new browser window, paste that in. And basically, like I said, as soon as that's published, it's live. This is actually live at the moment. So not complete, but live, right? And we're seeing it basically the way I left it. And every time I go in and change things, I go back to my original story, and I can add in a subheading, for example, Autumn in Ontario. I can go ahead and it's automatically saved. I'll go and share again. When I go back to that share option, you'll notice it says, we've noticed you've made a change. Do you want to update the link? Yes, I do. So that's going to publish those changes to the final piece. And if I go back to that project, this is the live audience version, if you will, and just refresh the page. There we go. I mean, it was a simple change, but it's there effectively immediately. So it's a great way to sort of build out that content without having to, and not just create it, but also being able to share it. What I like about tools like this is that you don't have to spend a lot of time on the technology, right? If the goal is to produce some kind of end result beyond learning a software application, tools like this are great because they let you get past the technology to where you want to be, where you're the creator of the content. You're not just learning how to use a tool, you are creating content that is valuable, that you can share to others. You can share, obviously, if you're a student, you can share it for if so allowed, for assignments and for assessment, things along those lines. But the other thing about this is that what I find exciting is that because it's so easy and because it's designed to make your work essentially look pretty good without worrying too much about a lot of details on layout and things like that. If you're not going to be a graphic designer, if you're not going to be, if your major isn't fine arts, there's just some stuff you're just not going to have the time to learn, but you still want your things to look nice, right? I'll give you an example. When I was teaching my journalism students years ago at Centennial College, there was always a component for creating a website or a web-based photo story. And at that time, we were teaching them to use to create that with a tool called Dreamweaver, which some of you may have heard of. It's a web tool from Adobe, previously from Macromedia. And we had a small window in which to do this. And really the focus was on the story, on the imagery primarily, and then secondarily the text, because they were doing captions for everything. And then the web component was just, did you get it to work, kind of thing. They didn't spend a lot of time making it look pretty because frankly, there wasn't a lot of time to make it look pretty. And if you're not a web developer, web designer, there's, Dreamweaver can be a challenge to work with. And I didn't really have another tool at that time that they could have access to. So that's what we used. But if I had something like this, for my journalism students, I would have just jumped on it, because really the learning curve there is no curve. It's a flat line. They can get into this and pretty quickly, pretty intuitively start building out content. And from my perspective, as a creator of content, that's exciting to me, because I can produce something, it looks good, and that makes me want to do more. I can almost guarantee the majority of my journalism students who had to create those web pages in Dreamweaver only ever showed those to me and the rest of the classroom, because there just wasn't the time to spend on embellishing and learning the finer points of CSS and HTML and JavaScript. There just was no time. So they did a basic page, basic site. Okay, that's my 10-minute warning, so I'm going to stop that timer. But tools like this make it easier and make that message, I think, more impactful, because you can spend the time on this, on telling the story, on creating the story, and not how do I make it do what I want it to do. There are limits, there are guardrails on tools like this for sure, but I think there's enough variety in here that you can tell an impactful story. You can pull in engaging imagery and video footage or audio files, things along those lines, and really embellish and fully sort of round out a story that everyone's going to appreciate. You know, if you're going that written route. If you're not, then there's certainly video is the other way to go, right? And short videos, 1 to 2 to 3 minutes long, can be incredibly impactful, especially if they're coming with that student's voice as the narration, right? So there's lots of different ways to see this happening. If you're faculty, you can utilize these tools to help with learning materials. You can create introductory videos on your course to get people excited. You know, that could be a lot of fun. I never would have done that, never would have thought to do that when I was teaching. But again, the tools that are out there now to do this kind of thing make it so much easier to create that content and grab your viewers, grab your audience where they live, if you will, which is more and more and more on a screen somewhere, whether it's in their hand or whether it's like I am right now on a desktop. So it gives you lots of different things to hopefully consider. Okay, so actually I'll pop out of that and get back up to this one here. This is a stock image in this project, and I again summed up something I would not have thought how to create myself, right? And it was already, you know, they've obviously added the text, but great idea, and really was topical for that particular project that I was working on. We've got about just under 10 minutes left, and I want to sort of take a sip of water and see if there are any questions out there. Anything that anyone would like to share, or if you've got questions about what I've talked about so far, feel free to unmute your microphone and speak up. I'm going to close my window here from a sharing perspective so I can see everybody's faces. Oh, we had some more people join. That's great. I see a hand from Nancy. Yes. Okay. Now let's see. Yeah, great. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, Jim. I can't unmute my video for some reason today, but anyway, I just wanted to thank you. I feel so energized and inspired by your talk.
Thank you.
I love storytelling. I love sharing images with my students. I think this is a great tool. I'd love to have more opportunities to explore this with some great teacher like yourself. One of my questions is, can we add music and I don't know, sound voiceovers to this platform or to the storytelling?
That's a really good question. Spark itself will support embedded video. So a link from, say, YouTube or so on, and it'll do the same thing for audio. But in terms of having it sort of run in line with a story, it wouldn't work in that sense. So that's where I typically will bow towards creating a video that'll do, if that's one of the things I really want to share, I'll either create a segment that's got the music and got the voiceover and tie that in as a component of a Spark page, or I will just publish a video itself and share that through tools like YouTube or Vimeo and make that available. The nice thing about Spark is I can pull that video in so I can embellish more with the written word and other assets, and then still have the video there for people to watch and listen to. Good question.
Thank you.
Oh, let me one more thing there, and that is one element we didn't. I focused on Spark Page primarily, but one of the other components of that Spark service is something called Spark Video, and it's more like a PowerPoint slide metaphor where it's meant for really short form video, maybe 15 to 30-second voice clips, and you can add iconography and imagery to that presentation. You'd still end up having to embed it. It wouldn't like sort of be, it would still be its own element that you'd have to embed into the story, but it's another way, if video makes you a little nervous, it's something you can start with. Adobe's also got a great tool called Premiere Rush, which is our sort of entry-level but very powerful video editing tool. If you ever looked at Premiere Pro, which is our professional level video tool, and felt like you needed to run from the room screaming because it was just like, oh my God, this is a space shuttle, there's too many panels. Premiere Rush is, while it's based on Premiere Pro, is a completely different animal, very intuitive, very easy to use. So that's another option as well. Thank you for your questions. Great. Anyone else have a question or observation, anything they want to share? What you've been doing in your own classes? Oh, thanks, Linda. Oh, let's take a look at the chat pod, Jim. See what's going on in there. Oh, okay. Oh, Janice is, oh, great. Thank you for sharing that, Janice. That's fantastic. And it's an Adobe Spark webinar. So there you go, Nancy. Some more information there. And you've got like on-site resources from the sounds of it. Just saying.
Yeah, you do.
Definitely make use of those. So that can be really super helpful.
Just something to think about. Some of the things that we've suggested for Adobe Spark is like an intro video or like an intro web page, just introducing yourself to your students. So you can also get your students to do that for you, right? So then you can start connecting and creating those connections with everybody.
Yeah, there's so much potential with that tool because it is so easy to use. It's very freeing from a creative perspective. You know, the I mean, like I said, I don't like using the word prolific, but I put together a lot of content. You know, whether people like it or not is a different story. But I do quite a bit of work in Spark as well as in Behance, and so much so, like I said, that I've had to categorize my content. But I'll do self-reflection pieces. I'll do tutorials. I really enjoyed it. Was doing a sort of a look back personally of how I went down this road to begin with. Like, how did somebody who thought he was going to be an architect when he was a kid end up being a photographer and a teacher and working for Adobe and telling stories with pictures and stuff like that, and just sort of exploring my own creative path. And it was a lot of fun to put that together because it was a little bit of a trip down memory lane, finding some old photos and things like that, and just it was a lot of fun to sort of revisit those things in my life from the past, which is, and how they've led up to where things are at now.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim.
You're welcome. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you've all got something out of it, and happy storytelling.
Hope you enjoyed the day, everybody.